Jesus walked among us, unashamed of his humanity, embracing us as brothers and sisters without hesitation. Though we are often consumed by pride, believing ourselves to be more educated, of higher class, or simply better than our fellow man, Jesus came to show that all are equal, no matter their race, education, or standing. He sought to align himself with the lowest, the downtrodden, the overlooked. He knew he must humble himself to serve all, descending beneath so he could lift others up. Such was his way, to be the servant of many by meeting them at their lowest. The Holy Spirit seeks to reshape our minds to be like Christ's, to cultivate a way of thinking where no one considers themselves above another. This isn't a theory, but a transformation meant to manifest in every thought, where humility flourishes and superiority withers. Only then can the humility of Christ seep into our thoughts, changing how we see ourselves and those around us. Consider this. When you are alone and your thoughts swirl in silence, what do you believe about yourself? In those moments, do you find echoes of Christ's humility or whispers of Lucifer's arrogance? If you compare yourself to others and believe yourself superior, these thoughts mimic those that poisoned the mind of Lucifer before he became the devil. Instead, we must view others as greater than ourselves, fostering a spirit that uplifts and does not tear down. We must strive to think not of lifting ourselves, but of bowing low to raise others higher, just as Christ did. In a passage from Ephesians 3:8, Paul, with a voice weathered by grace, confesses himself as the least of all saints. This admission wasn't a mere platitude. It sprang from a deep alignment with Christ's humility. Paul, reflecting on his own spirit, considered himself lower than all his brethren in faith. Yet the Scriptures do not demand we see others as superior to ourselves. Such a task is untenable. Consider the humility of Jesus, the humblest among men, pure and holy. Could he, in his sanctity, regard others as better? Certainly not. True humility, then, is not about self-deprecation or believing others to be superior. Rather, it is recognizing the importance of others as greater than our own. There exists a kind of counterfeit humility, a laborious and ultimately vain attempt to view others as better. The Bible, in Philippians 2:3, crafts a distinct narrative, urging us to deem others more significant than ourselves. This is the humility Jesus embodied, demonstrated profoundly when he, at the Last Supper, assumed the role of a servant and washed his disciples' feet, a task reserved for the lowest of servants in his time. This act was not about seeing himself as less, but seeing his service as essential. When Jesus and his disciples arrived for the Last Supper, the room was barren and silent. There was no host to welcome them, only an empty space and a basin by the door, as was customary. Each man glanced around, wondering who would stoop to wash the other's feet. Peter may have thought, "I'm to lead once Jesus is gone. How could I do such a thing?" Matthew, educated and used to numbers, might have reasoned, "I cannot humble myself to wash the feet of these fishermen." Each disciple believed himself too important to perform the slave's task, and thus none moved to do it. In the stillness, Jesus rose, unassuming and resolute. He took the basin in his hands and with gentle purpose knelt to wash the dust from their feet. He did not wash their feet because he believed them more spiritual or purer than himself, but because he truly saw their importance. He placed himself beneath them, not out of show, but out of genuine humility before his Father. This is what humility truly is, to stand as nothing before God, stripped of pride and pretense. If you are blessed with intellect, remember who endowed you with it. You could have been born with a mind or body that falters, but you are whole and strong. How could you then be proud of gifts that are not yours? It is wise to be humble, for all we possess comes from the hand of God. Only a fool is proud in the face of such grace. What stands lower than a servant? Perhaps only a criminal, or worse still, a murderer, would be considered beneath a servant's station. Jesus, nailed to the cross, was executed like a criminal, dying in agony as the worst of them did. Crucifixion was the Roman punishment reserved for those deemed irredeemable, the most hardened and wretched souls in Palestine. For hours they hung, suffering until death came slow and final. Jesus, untainted and pure, lowered himself to die upon that cross, accepting his fate as if he were one of the condemned. Even from childhood, the humility of Jesus shone bright. Joseph and Mary, imperfect like any other couple, lived with him, the faultless son. Their household was no utopia. They quarreled like anyone else. Yet despite his sinlessness, Jesus, instead of demanding submission from his earthly parents, bowed in obedience to his imperfect foster father and mother. Humility is a secret well worth keeping, for to kneel to another's will is not always an easy thing. Our pride fights the idea of submitting to those we consider beneath us. But Jesus knew that true humility holds no pretenses. It does not measure the worth of others or count superiority as a virtue. The humble can submit to anyone because they see themselves as nothing, giving their grace freely and finding no quarrel with their lot. Jesus was content to work as a carpenter. When he began his ministry, he took no lofty titles, never cloaking himself in the robes of reverend. He sought no position to elevate himself above the common folk he came to serve. He lived among his brothers, indistinguishable in his simplicity, and when the crowds wished to crown him as king, he quietly slipped away. He did nothing to win the honor of men. When he healed the sick, he urged them not to spread word of it. His humility shone through in these quiet acts. He sought no applause and staged no spectacle to draw attention to himself. His heart was fixed on the Father, and he gave all glory to him alone. What a beautiful vision we glimpse in him, a man as we all ought to be. Imagine a world filled with people like this, humble and pure of heart. And while we cannot will such a world into being, we can start within ourselves. In the quiet places of our lives, we can take up humility and strive to walk in his steps. On the night before he was crucified, after he washed the disciples' feet, Jesus said, "You call me Lord and Master, yet I have washed your feet. You must do the same for one another." What did he mean? Some have thought that his words imply we must all wash one another's feet, even if our feet hardly needs cleaning. Such a practice becomes nothing more than a hollow ritual. But what did Jesus truly do that night when he took the basin and washed his disciples' feet? If they had been shod like us today, in modern days, there would have been no need to wash their feet at all. Jesus wasn't performing a ritual. He saw a humble and dirty task that needed to be done, and he did it with love. So, when he said, "I have given you an example. I, the Lord and teacher, washed your feet, so you also must wash one another's feet," he wasn't calling us to repeat a symbolic act. He was showing us that true service is to meet the real needs of others with a humble heart. He showed that we must be willing to do the difficult and unglamorous work, to care for one another with compassion, not through empty rituals, but by recognizing the humble, dirty tasks that must be done and doing them without complaint. This is his call to us, to wash one another's feet in spirit and in deed. It's a matter of seeing a need and meeting it. What Jesus did when he took that basin and washed their feet spoke volumes of his entire life. Though the scriptures remain silent about his 30 years in Nazareth, we can imagine the patterns of his days. He must have spent them serving his younger siblings, his mother Mary, and his neighbors, ready to do any task for anyone. In that humility, he embodied God's desire for how humanity should live. This is how God wishes you to live. If the glory of Jesus grips your heart, your life will be transformed. Do not trouble yourself if others around you fail to live this way. Do not judge them, for that is God's domain. Instead, strive to embody this spirit yourself. How joyful your life can be. After humbly washing his disciples' feet, Jesus said, "If you know these things, you will be truly happy if you do them." Happiness does not come from lording over others, but from service. Jesus moved closely among those on the fringes of society. He mingled with them as an equal, embracing those deemed lowest both socially and morally, prostitutes, drunkards, and cheats. Though sinless, he was not afraid of whispers branding him a friend of sinners. His perfect holiness did not make others feel ashamed or awkward. Instead, he welcomed them warmly. Such is the mark of a truly humble person. Despite his purity, he never wielded it to isolate others, but rather made them feel comforted by his presence. Jesus was like that, and we too can walk in his steps. The Pharisees were not like that. They shunned those who sought them, believing themselves too holy to touch the common folk. But Jesus was different. He walked among the outcasts and the broken, making them feel at ease. He mingled so freely with his disciples that Peter, emboldened, felt he could rebuke and offer counsel to the Lord himself. Imagine that, a disciple offering his advice to the Master, saying, "Lord, perhaps you should do this or that." Look at Christian leaders today. How many are seen mingling this way as Jesus did? Too often they remain aloof and distant. Christianity, in many ways, has failed to live as Christ did on earth. We must recognize this and own our shortcomings. But there is hope, and it starts with you. You who listen now can demonstrate Christ's life in your own home, your own town. Little by little, as we each strive to live as he did, our nation may see true Christianity once more, embodied in those who walk in Jesus' humble steps. A proud man never asks for prayer, believing he needs nothing. But Jesus, the Son of God, who lived without blemish, turned to his disciples and said, "Will you come and pray with me? The weight is heavy, and my heart is burdened." In his humanity, he recognized his own weakness and sought solace in the company of his friends. Can you do the same, or are you too wrapped in your own self-reliance to admit when you need help? We are often far from the humility of Christ. Our refusal to acknowledge our limits and our emptiness blinds us to the grace that could fill us. Jesus knew his own limitations and stood before his Father as a humble servant. In that humility, the Father's power flowed through him without restraint. Two spirits move across this world, one that climbs upward, exalting itself in pride, and another that bows low, seeking to serve. These are the spirits of Lucifer and Christ. They whisper through every corner of life, even in our churches, where some push others down to raise themselves higher. Which spirit is that, if not that of Lucifer, the spirit of Satan, festering among the faithful? But Jesus came with a spirit utterly different, one that sought no throne, asked for no crown, but instead humbled itself and served. Here is how we recognize a true disciple, not by a desire to rise above, but by a yearning to serve. They wish not to stand over others, but to bow lower, to bless and uplift those around them. In their humility, they reflect Christ, who came to bear the burdens of many, and in doing so, revealed the Father's grace. In his final hours, Jesus' humility shone in its fullest form. Before the world, he faced trial and was condemned to a brutal death. Denied justice, he stood alone, mocked and humiliated, bearing the weight of scorn without calling on angels to aid him. He stood, shoulders bowed under the cross, enduring each step without complaint, embodying humility in its most profound state. His suffering became the clearest guidepost of how to live a life surrendered. Throughout his days, Jesus walked with hands open wide, always giving, always offering. In the end, he stretched them out one last time to receive the nails and embrace the burden of the cross. The path he walked was one of surrender, where fists unclench, where hearts release their grip on the need to fight. He asks us to follow his lead, to surrender our rights, to cease our judgment, and let God alone judge. "I do not judge anyone," Jesus said. He accepted the humiliating death the Father ordained, obedient even unto death, not caring how he was to be slain. This is the true Jesus of Scripture, not like the celebrated heroes of today, but the despised and forsaken one, nailed to the cross. He was rejected, unheard, unheralded. With humility and surrender, he calls us to follow him with open hands and willing hearts. This is the core of Christianity, to walk a path not for glory but for love, to seek humility and live with hands that offer help instead of harm. It is a call to surrender our pride, to let go of our need to judge, and to walk humbly in the spirit of the one who bore the cross for us all.